Hello, my name is Maria Axente. I'm Responsible AI and AI for Good lead at PWC UK, and it's a pleasure to be talking to you today about responsible AI and how can we balance both benefits and risk of AI. The last 5 years, we have seen a flurry of those headlines in the Western media, where the technology that we call artificial intelligence or even more basic algorithms being deployed in various contexts have started to show up a bit their teeth, and sometimes not very pleasant. From algorithms that discriminate women against job application or credit cards, all the way of discriminating students from impoverished backgrounds in certain parts of the world, or sending the wrong people in prisons. All those application or uses of algorithms in those contexts have started to raise awareness of the positive, negative implication of these technologies, and with that, the realization that we have much more at hand that just benefits promised by this technology alone. Even yourselves in South Korea have witnessed such example with the Luda AI chatbot that has definitely sparked a bit of debate. On one hand, by showcasing that is very easy and possible for chatbots to become racist against women, sexual minorities, or foreigners, but in the same time, raising awareness to the wider public that this type of incidents is not something that happens somewhere in a corner of the world, or it's quite difficult for those harms to be realized that are a real and present dangers. And while such chatbot was scrapped, and many of the solutions that we have seen in those examples have been retired, the reality remains the same, is that we need to be considering well before we start using those applications, what could go wrong, what are the possible implications of the negative implications of AI, and how can this technology that display and possess self-agency and display or behave with a certain degree of autonomy from human intervention, adapt and interact with the external environment, need to be governed in a way that sees those risks minimized and benefits maximized. And while we spend the AI community has tried to understand why those incidents have happened, and thinking that it's very easy to replicate such examples. What needs to be done for us to be able to prevent that? It's linked very much to the realization that so far we haven't really, on one hand, understand the true nature of AI, and while deployed, not only how to design it, but when deployed and used, understand how far those implication goes, how deep this impact is, and what needs to be done before we embark in considering this technology to be able to avoid this real and present dangers, but also being able to prevent future and more profound harms caused by this technology. And as a result of this public outcry, the benefit of having this public debate and awareness was that many institutions with a formal mandate in form of regulators or member states or expert groups like World Economic Forums or researchers or industries bodies have had a bit of a soul searching in understanding what needs to be done individually and collectively in order to achieve this desired balance in between maximization of benefits and minimization of risk. And 2021 has been a fantastic year to the extent that we have seen the first AI Act released by European Commission that looks at regulating and setting up the right safeguards for the AI application when it comes to risks, and being able to foster a type of behavior and around the development of AI that considers the various risks and impacts early on in the development, but also being able to continuously monitor for those risks throughout the life cycle of AI. On the other hand, what we have seen, even in the current context of a pandemic, is the excitement of the executive, the realization that of the potential of the AI, is the fact that AI starts to deliver, AI starts to demonstrate its return on investment, and as a result, executives are much more inclined and willing to invest in AI. So much so that if the beginning of before the pandemic, 2019, when some of the studies we've learned from our executives that there was so much of 47% of them were not in the position to invest or consider using AI. A year later, in the middle of a pandemic, this percentage reduced to only 5%. Which signals very clearly that executives are looking at technology and in general, and more narrowly in AI, to be part of the efforts of recovering and thriving in the current economic context. And while looking at this extraordinary potential in increasing productivity and consumption, and being able to address many of the organizational nightmares, it's important to always keep in mind that it's not just about the benefits, but also about the risk. And the way ahead is to realize and to be able to consider those moral implications of AI, and with it the harm that might occur, while we attempt to maximize the benefit. And the third important development that has happened in the last period as a result of increased adoption of AI, but also this I would say massive attention given to the cases where AI has gone wrong, is the development of new discipline, new field studies. One being AI ethics, that looks at the moral implication of AI, and being able to not only research but engage various actors around society to develop recommendations that could be followed public policy level and then regulation, but also private organization, with a view of coming together and building a vision for a good life with AI. On the other hand, a discipline that is more grounded in the reality of development and using AI, the responsible AI approaches, they're looking into taking all those consideration and high level and abstract rules coming out of the discipline of AI ethics, and being able to translate it into guides and recommendations in the realm of development and deploying. And while many people change or keep even in the AI community use those terms interchangeably, it is important to realize that we need to be having, on one hand, a dialogue and research and reflection and creation of a body of knowledge that looks at the moral implication of self-learning agents. On the other hand, we need also rules that are actionable and could be followed by those who are right now developing those applications in so many contexts in our society. And while AI still is a technology that puzzles and excites many people, and we are more and more aware of its profound implications. It's important to acknowledge that in order to achieve this balancing between risk and benefits, um, the only way to do it is to go through a journey that allows us to um, understand at the beginning as much as possible what AI is, but also where and how the context where it's being developed and used will be transformed as a result of this type of technology. The golden rules of responsible AI are in fact some key principles that every organization should follow in order to start the journey. And while there are many moral implications that we ought to research and discuss at the society level in different parts of the world, hopefully those rules will give a bit of a guidance on how to proceed ahead cautiously and not on one hand be paralyzed by fear that could be possible, or follow the mantra just move fast and break things. The first role is to understand the AI you're building and using. While we still struggle with a consensus on what artificial intelligence is, and as many books you might read, you'll find as many different definitions of it. What is really important is to find a definition that works for you and for your organization, but also most importantly to acknowledge what technology under this umbrella you're using and where. Because only by being so specific and so precise, you'll be able to understand if the solution you're building, either you label it or not AI, it's fit for purpose, addresses the real problems, but also acknowledges for the impact, the immediate impact, but more indirect impact, and also what happens on long term. The second important rule is to acknowledge the role of the context it has in creating AI. On one hand, the fact that AI is a reflection of the context is being created through the data sets that are being collected, how those data sets are being created and who creates them, but also to that extent how algorithms are being designed and used, and who does it, and what sort of values they represent. And while traditionally in building technology, we would consider that the life cycle of an application starts with business understanding and the design. When it comes to AI, what ends up being reflected in this design is the realities of one organization. That's why it's really important is to consider how your business and corporate strategy is to be realized with technology under AI, and how various organizational capabilities from the policies and procedures you have in place, the business units, the way you're organized, and all the processes that surround it, including the regulation in your industry, comes to have an impact on the design. On the other hand, post deployment, new capabilities, organizational capabilities, needs to be considered into be the ability to monitor for the performance of these applications. The stochastic nature of AI pushes us to reconsider how we monitor this type of organization, and how we make sure that its performance remain within a certain thresholds, but also being able to recognize and deal with the disruption that comes as a result of using AI. The third rule is to look at the composition of the team and the boundaries of their responsibilities. And while most of the development teams will increasingly have, besides the traditional um, uh, um, te- technical and skills, we will see gradually ethicists and strategies being part of the core teams, but gradually recognizing the importance of domain expertise, domain diversity, besides the other types of personal diversities that needs to be included in order to be able to recognize the specific requirements of the context where AI is being deployed and used, and being able to work with that. But besides having a diverse and truly inclusive team that recognize the different voices, both in terms of gender and race and age, but also domain. One key element that needs to be reconsidered is the boundaries of responsibilities, both personal. So, for example, how much of a car crash caused by an algorithm, it's down to a data scientist versus the organization that owns that solution versus the wider society that was not able to create the right regulation for this type of application, and being able to recognize that various players, both individuals, in teams and organization, have a distinct role to play and building and governing AI, and this needs to be recognized and renegotiated. And while we will see, regulation emerging around the world, and to a certain extent that settling the rules of responsibility, the boundaries of responsibility, this conversation needs to happen at the industry level, AI industry level, but also at the organizational level. Well, those boundaries of responsibility needs to be established in a constructive and an open environment, and follow through. The fourth important rule is to acknowledge early on in the design of the possible risks of AI, and being able to mitigate for those risks. And while some of those risks are brand new, from the risk of unintended consequences, of lack of accountability and clear governance, or bias and discriminations. Others are better known through the practices of tech industries. But nevertheless, what's really important is to be able to acknowledge in the design phase that such risk exists, and they need to be addressed by proper design requirements, control and governance requirements early on. And this type of approach needs to be consistent and throughout the AI life cycle, and continue all the way down into how we use AI, because with the 24/7 functioning of AI in real life, it's important for us never to lose sight that we have this application that is making a difference in the way we operate. And while the business executives we've surveyed have been very much aware and are increasingly aware of the possible risk, the challenge comes in developing this new type of skills that needs to work alongside the technical one, the engineering and process, like to be able to have to establish those practices as business as usual. If in the past, technology teams, engineering team had or were required to interact with the compliance team whenever at a certain point in time in the development, with the emerging of AI and its stochastic and real-time nature, this type of expertise needs to be brought along early on and consistently throughout the development life cycle of AI. And lastly, probably I would say the most important rule of all is the reflection of the right values for each context in the way those application is being developed. And what do I mean by right values? It has become a common practice for many organizations or startups around the world to adopt ethical principles that are were created by a certain culture and philosophical school, to the realization those rules are not very much synchronized with the values of their own culture and philosophical mindset. So it's important on one hand to recognize the key moral themes as being identified by the research conducted mainly in the Western world. And as you see in the screens, we've identified 9 key themes by researching hundreds of documents issued by researchers, expert groups, regulators, or industry players, is to say that each context, each culture has its own individual set of values, and those values need to be reflected in the ethical principles of AI. And while it's important to follow the best practices as established by experts around the world, it's equally important to acknowledge the context where those values manifest themselves and AI is being created and used, and have this good translation of your personal values into the key rules that are then being codified as design requirements. While researching the moral implications of AI has, as I said, been conducted mainly in the Western society, is important for countries outside the big key players on AI to invest in this type of research, invest in understanding the moral implication of society level. And I can't stress how important this is in order to preserve the values of your country, your society, whilst in the same time to end up designing and deploying an AI that is suitable for your cultural and national needs. Ultimately, what the most important rule that we all need to follow is a change in mentality, a change in the way we see technology being used in the context of our lives. Since in the most recent years, since the emergence of Silicon Valley, the philosophy that has powered computer science and they gave us the amazing technology progress that we have seen, it has been, can we build it? The reality is that for us to be able to foster the true benefits of AI and balance it with a minimization of the risk, we need to be having a different philosophy. Just because we can, we shouldn't go ahead until we fully understand what are all the moral implications, all the possible negative impact, and act accordingly. It has been a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.